what they have done to our country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame.
I just want to clarify here. You bring up Springfield, Ohio, and ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Well, I've seen people on television.
Let me just say here, this is
the people on television say my dog was taken and used for food. So maybe he said that, and maybe that's a good thing to say for a city manager.
I'm not taking this from television.
But the people on television saying their dog was eaten by the people that went there.
Again, the Springfield city manager says there's no evidence of that.
Yeah. So I guess I want to say at the outset that sometimes something happens in the news and then everybody kind of covers it because it's what everybody covers. And that's really not that interesting. Right? Like if you're just tuning in to see us say exactly the same things that, I don't know, Left Reckoning or the Majority Report or the Young Turks or whoever, have already said, on some level, who cares? This is not that, right? Got some stuff to say about this. Have a little bit of a story to tell regarding this. So there is a reason that we're covering this, and we will get to that in a moment. But before that, I should say first, I'm Ben Burgis. This is Give Them an Argument. I am joined as always by our super producer, Jake Appett, and our very talented graphic designer, J. Andrew World. And a little bit later in the show, we are going to be joined by Will Cooper, who wrote an article for Newsweek. I think we have the graphic of that somewhere. There we go. Called "Is There Too Much Inequality in America?" And Will's been on the show before, but I think this is going to be a bit of a friendly debate because whereas he would say yes in answer to that question, what he regards as too much inequality is not really, like I think where he would draw the line as far as how much is too much is very different from mine, right? I think he acknowledges that what we have has gotten out of control, but I think he kind of thinks that, the sort of, mundane realities of capitalism in, say, 1970, right? That level of inequality, I think he probably thinks is fine. So we definitely have, when it wasn't like, I don't know, the average CEO was probably only making 40 times what the average worker was or something like that, rather than ballooning out to hundreds of times. My sense is that he doesn't really object to that, right? He only objects to what's, like the really absurd lengths that it's gotten to since then. And, I think that if, one person is making 10 times as much as another person, for example, then I think there's something profoundly wrong with the way that your society is organized if it leads to that, right? It's outside of the control of the person who gets the short end of the stick, right? So that's going to be that argument. But before that, we have a couple of other things to do. So one is this is probably a good time to bring up again. I don't know if we still have, we might not have the graphic anymore, but my pamphlet 4 essays on Palestine is, so it's from Everyday Analysis. And it was, so that's Alfie Brown's publishing house in the UK. It's a small publisher that only does pamphlets, mostly kind of theory-oriented sorts of things. Our good friend Jason Miles had a pamphlet from them called "I Was a Teenage Anarchist." And frequent guest Slavoj Žižek has had a pamphlet from them. There we go, and this is mine. So it's called 4 Essays on Palestine. There is a link. I don't know if we should even say pre-order anymore. I think it's about at the printer now. So I guess we'll just say a link where you can order that. And I think that copies will be arriving in the US, I believe, within the next few weeks. I am probably going to be doing some kind of launch event in Los Angeles in mid-October, late October. We're still trying to nail down the exact date, but Jason Miles and Anna Kasparian have both said they'd participate in that. So we're definitely going to do something. So keep an eye out for that. And we're also going to do a UK launch event when I'm in London for the Historical Materialism Conference in November. So just did not want to let all this go by without mentioning that. Okay. Moving on. There was, of course, this debate on Tuesday.
I don't think so, actually. I don't think there was a debate, if I'm remembering correctly. I think I was just I don't know what I was doing something else other than watching that debate at a bar where I heard Donald Trump's voice louder than I ever want to hear that voice in my eardrums. Not to spare Kamala, but definitely the voice itself was was more melodious.
Oh my God. I mean, no question. Like, when he does the cackling Kamala thing, it's like, yeah, I don't know, man. I wouldn't remind people that she laughs sometimes and you don't.
If Kamala and Trump are both leftists, and they had the same exact platform, I think I would pick Kamala just based on vibes. But unfortunately, as I think you're about to get to, the election's not just based on vibes. Well, maybe some people wish it was, but
there are non-vibe things going on, yes. And quite a few of them are not good. I think that, because obviously our focus in this first hour of the show is very heavily going to be on Trump because, my God, right? It is worth spending 90 seconds doing the Kamala sucks half of this, because Kamala sucks. I mean, let's be really, really clear on that. Like, she's always sucked. I mean, she sucked in 2020 when she was running for president. I mean, there's a reason none of us liked her back then. She, I guess, was sort of amusing when she was doing her Veep impression, for the few years in between then. But to the extent that she expressed substantive views, that kind of sucked. And she's really sucked since she started running for president.
Well, remember there was about 30 seconds. That was a really good 30 seconds where she kind of hadn't said anything about what she was going to do.
Yeah, when she was an empty suit.
Yeah, I miss those days, man. I was full of hope on those days.
Oh my God,
Kamala was going to do everything I wanted her to do.
Yeah, I mean, for
30 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, I would go so far as to say about a week and a half. Between when she started running for president, when she actually started expressing political opinions, when she was just kind of being sunny and pleasant, and she picked Tim Walz. So it's like, oh, hey, she could really be all things to all Democrats for a minute there. But then she actually had to start making choices, and the choices all sucked. Right. I mean, this, again, I think the VP pick was probably the best that was going to happen realistically, the best thing that was on the table. And, I'm not immune from the Coach Waltz charm by any means. There have been some good proposals, but it's like, overall, let's be real about this. So the article that I wrote for Jacobin about the debate was, I think the title they ended up going with was "This Can't Be It." In it, I said last night's debate, right? This came out on Wednesday. Kamala Harris rightly insisted that the country is exhausted and ready to move on from Trump, but we deserve to move on to something much better than this. And it really is, to me, the thing that the single sentence that would sum up the debate is Trump accused Kamala of wanting to give everyone government health insurance, and he was lying. Right? She actually doesn't want to do that. She's been very clear about not wanting to do that. He accused her of being sympathetic to the Palestinians. Also, sadly, not at all true. Right? In fact, he said, she hates Israel. And just like in his debate with Biden, he said, he's become a Palestinian, a bad Palestinian.
He said that if Kamala, correct me if I'm wrong, but if Kamala is elected, Israel will not exist within 2 years. I think.
Yes. He has said variations on that, I think, several times.
Because it's going to be one democratic state with a new name.
Fucking awesome.
Yeah.
I'm so excited. Yeah. No, look, I was kind of delighted that my favorite member of the Harris family got a shout out. That would be Donald Harris, Kamala's father, who, as Trump correctly noted, is a Marxist academic. But sadly, I do not think there's been a lot of influence there. In fact, they seem to be pretty estranged, at least partially because of political differences. In fact, during 2020, when she was running for president, her dad publicly criticized her, said for making cheap appeals about identity politics because of her the comment about smoking weed and being Jamaican. And if Donald Harris was running for president, I'd be fucking excited. But in the world where that man was somehow,
I do give my children permission to make some like weird identity based comment about me, but hopefully it's not in service of like a neoliberal project, But if it's like if for some reason my kid has to be like, my dad was Jewish, you're saying I don't like bagels, like I'm okay with it, but if it's like if they're trying to distract from
wait, you're saying that people don't like bagels?
I don't know. I mean,
I'm a Gentile. I like bagels.
I can't imagine what they would be appealing to or what they were trying to defend. Like, my dad was Jewish. You're saying, I don't know what the policy of that would be.
Well, look, look, I think I'm the only person on the screen right now who regularly makes bagels, Yeah, my mom used to. I love homemade bagels. Then again, I have also many times over the years honored vicariously the Harris family's, heritage. But in any case, yeah. So the reality of Harris's positions on Israel-Palestine, on healthcare, there was a point where she was like, "Oh, my economic plan is so good that Goldman Sachs praised it." She, she was like bringing up like all the Republicans who were endorsing her as a bragging point. That's pretty grim, right? But that was what the article was about. But come on. We're here to talk about the dogs, the cats of Springfield, Ohio. So, fun fact, a very good friend of mine who I went to high school with lives in Springfield, Ohio. And a couple of weeks before the debate, I was having a beer with him over Skype. And he told me this thing about people claiming that, Haitian refugees were, eating people's pet cats as an example of like the kind of insane bullshit that he'd see people say in the comment section on local media. And we had this whole conversation about how the comment sections on local media are always the worst part of the internet. And then in the couple weeks since between then and the debate, seeing that story gain national traction to the point that Donald Trump said it on the debate stage.
Oh my God.
Has really been something. And it's also been very strange. So there was this whole interaction between J.D. Vance and Crystal Ball. So JD and that wall of text that's on the screen right now is this is from an argument he was having with Zaid Jilani, who is, is a commentator. I agree with him about some things, disagree about others. But, is actually somebody I interact with a fair amount on Twitter, which also makes this weird. But, so he was arguing about the Haitians and and essentially, he was saying, "Oh, I'm lightly paraphrasing the wall of text here, but it's like
this is where the students you put that in the PowerPoint slide, and your students are like, "Is this gonna be on the test?" And you're like, "No, you just have to know that J.D. Vance and Zaid Jilani had an interaction. You don't have to fucking memorize all of that bullshit."
Exactly. Okay, so then Crystal Ball responds. We have a response. She quote tweets says, "When you insist on spreading neo-Nazi fueled smears," by the way, if that sounds like hyperbole, it shouldn't be. That one of the first people I know, maybe the first person to like make this claim in public, was literally a neo-Nazi.
Yeah, who used a fake name that was like a Nazi dog whistle.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you have to be a dog to pick up on.
Yeah, well, we're not gonna say his name. So
on the whistle here, but in any case, when you insist on spreading neo-Nazi fueled smears about immigrants leading to bomb threats, it kind of closes the space for this intellectual discussion about pluses and minuses of immigration. Now that you're retreating to, dude. And so, she's saying basically in this interaction between Vance and Zaid, Vance, who had spread the Haitians are eating the cats stuff before, I think it was originally mostly about cats, and then Trump really emphasized the dog. Trump also has a weird obsession with dogs. This is just a side point, but
it's just a good word to say in his voice. I think that's why he usually. I think he pivots a lot by what he likes saying. Cat versus that dog with like the new. It's
that extra syllable he can get out of it.
That is as good an analogy. That is as good an explanation as I've heard from anybody. Because my God, I have heard Trump say maybe thousands of times say that various things were done to various people like a dog. And it's like, oh, I fired him like a dog, like it's all these things that in fact nobody does to dogs.
He makes it sound like dogs like participate in society in a way that they just don't do. It's always
maybe they should like maybe it's he thinks that dogs.
Maybe in his mind palace, like dogs are always like, are like having jobs and getting fired.
They raised the corporate tax rate on them like a dog.
Exactly. So Vance had personally spread this very ugly, very racist urban legend about Haitian refugees. And then when Zaid was pushing back, he basically retreated to like, oh well, here are all these like social ills that are caused by the rapid expansion of new immigrant communities like the Haitians in Ohio. And so Crystal's point was like, well, come on, man, you really can't start the conversation with this incendiary bullshit and then retreat to this like abstract discussion about the pluses and minuses of immigration. Okay, so then we had it on screen for a second. Crystal responds, JD Vance responds, "Crystal Ball, I really hate neoliberalism. I'm a populist." Also Crystal Ball, anyone who doesn't think 20,000 cheap laborers should be dropped on a small Ohio town is a neo-Nazi. And there are a couple of things to note here. One is that Vance apparently believes that some person, some federal agency perhaps dropped the Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio. And I just want to tell you that's not how anything works. As it turns out,
and he knows that.
Of course, he knows that.
He's a piece of shit. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean,
I might hate this guy more than anyone I've ever hated that we've discussed on the program. I really fucking hate this guy.
That's kind of fair. We're gonna. Yeah.
Although someone we're going to discuss later is
someone we're going to discuss later comes on the list for me at least. As I mean, granted, I've never been
got a personal in it. I think if you had to sit and debate JD Vance, anyway, that's a flash forward.
No, that's entirely possible. But yeah, okay, so yeah. If you want to know how so many Haitians ended up in Springfield, Ohio, it's like, look, there are articles you can read with it that discuss this, that quote people talking about their motivations for moving there. It's like, well, I had a lot of family living there. There were job opportunities, et
The
cetera.
free fucking market. I mean, also for, I mean,
yeah. I mean, this is how like settlement patterns for immigrants have worked throughout history, right? It's not that like the only places immigrant communities ever end up clustering are like the biggest cities. I mean, that's not like, it's not like when all those Germans showed up in Wisconsin, where, had like, it's not like New York City didn't exist then, right?
They went from here.
Yeah, like,
you have yet because they hadn't brought it, but
yeah, I mean, you have people who, again, their job opportunities. There's maybe in some cases, there's like housing is a lot cheaper in Springfield, Ohio than it might be in other places. Once some people move, then other people move because that's where their family lives, relatives of theirs, friends of theirs, right? None of this is that mysterious. Second point is, I've got to say, this is just deeply strange to me on so many levels that like the Republican nominee for vice president is fighting on Twitter with somebody I actually know in real life. I mean, I was at her wedding, right? Like, this is, definitely, this is deeply strange, but,
come on, GTA, JD. We'll give you a fair hearing. We won't interrupt you.
Seriously. Yeah. I think I've got a pretty good resume. If you want to look at old debates, I let people say their piece and then respond to them. But yeah, okay. So the other half of this, though, is that the reason I wanted to talk about this is because it's been very strange to me to see this sort of play out in the last couple of weeks, not just because of my conversation with my friend in Springfield a few weeks ago, but one, the issue is one that I've been, like thinking about why there are all these refugees and immigrants from Haiti in the United States, right? How is it that so many people decided that it might be a good idea to leave Haiti? And the answer to that, if you know literally anything about this, it has a lot to do with the history of foreign and especially U.S. meddling in Haiti and the effects of that meddling, which has been an issue I've been tracking for a long time. In fact, we managed to find, we have the State News article here. So this is 20 years ago. In fact, a little over 20 years ago, because it was March 2004. So in March 2004, George W. Bush sent the Marines to Haiti to depose President Jean-Bertrand Aristide. They said they escorted him out of the country. He said they kidnapped him. And when that intervention happened, I was actually, fun fact, that was the first time I was ever arrested. Hasn't happened that many times, so it's happened a couple times. And I was, because at the protest, sadly, the State News doesn't archive apparently 20-year-old photos, because I know they originally ran a photo of this, but I tried to let, I was in my early 20s. I tried to light a Marine recruitment poster on fire at the protest. I don't even think it caught fire, but whatever. And so I ended up being arrested for that. But in any case, that certainly is an issue that I was tracking for a fairly long time. And in particular, the fact that there's this virulent and weirdly specific strain of anti-Haitian racism on the American right is something that I've been weirdly aware of for the last 2 years. We're going to get into why. I think a lot of this stuff really has roots that go back to the freak out in Europe and North America after the Haitian Revolution, 200 years ago. And like a lot of the lurid, like horror stories that were spread around then, about how bad the Haitians were. the freed slaves. And so it's kind of amazing to me that it's still quite this big a deal in the contemporary right, but it is. And to sort of narrate that, I want to go back 2 years, get in the Wayback Machine. Just about 2 years ago, fall of 2022, I was in Chicago doing a debate with one Curtis Yarvin, friend of Peter Thiel, blogger formerly best known by the name of the blog Mencius Moldbug. Somebody who has Politico actually did an article a while back where they listed the 6 thinkers they said were the biggest influences on J.D. Vance, and at least according to Politico, Thiel is one of them. Take that for whatever it's worth, whether they're right or not, but he has referenced him in a positive way. And he'd certainly be maybe not. Look, he's probably not objectively the worst person I've ever debated, but he's certainly the most unpleasant person I've ever been in the same room with in a context like that. And Haiti came up a lot at that debate. So we're probably not going to play all of these. We have several clips, but let's at least start with the first one.
So another place with an unfortunately very high crime rate is Haiti. And as you may know, Haiti has been in the news lately because the State Department is proposing its nth invasion of Haiti. How would you propose applying your Norwegian model to Haiti?
Well, I think that Haiti makes my point, so thank you for that, as much as would be humanly possible to do with any example in the world, because if you wanted to pick the single country in the world that was least like a Nordic social democracy, it would be Haiti, which, frankly, vastly more closely resembles anarcho-capitalism.
Wait, run that last part past me again.
They have that Haiti. How much of a welfare state does Haiti have? How much of a regulatory state does Haiti have? One of the things in the WikiLeaks cables, the State Department cables that were released, that were leaked, is that there was an effort during the first Obama term to increase the minimum wage in Haiti to, I believe, the princely sum of about $5 US a day. That was successfully lobbied against, among others, by the American State Department on behalf of American companies. That's about as weak a regulatory state as you could hope for. Power is wildly dispersed. Again, this is one of the least social democratic countries on the planet.
Do you suppose that's a cause or an effect? Have you spent a lot of time in the third world? Have you, I actually, when I was 6 or 7, I lived in the Dominican Republic, which is next door to Haiti. I'm sort of wondering why you think that this model has not been more widely applied in the third world, given the fact that these policies can turn Haiti into Norway.
Well, I don't think that your lived experience of being there is actually very relevant. I think what's relevant is the trivially available public data that you yourself just recited a minute ago, right? The nth intervention in Haiti that like Jean-Bertrand Aristide, when he ran for president of Haiti, his original campaign slogan, swear I'm not making this up, was that he wanted to raise the Haitian people from misery to poverty, right? This is a very unambitious reform program, right? This is the most minimal effort at some kind of lefty reform program you could get, but you try that shit in America's Monroe Doctrine backyard, and you end up getting stuff like Aristide being literally kidnapped and taken out of the country by U.S. Marines in 2004. You broaden your view beyond Haiti, and you start looking at the rest of the Western Hemisphere south of the United States. You see, for example, you want to talk about attempts to implement something like a Nordic model. You see Salvador Allende in Chile being a democratic socialist, get a president, being killed and removed in a coup that's very openly supported by the United States. You see that in Guatemala in '54. You see that versions of that in Haiti numerous times. This is not ancient Cold War history. I mentioned Haiti in 2004. We could also talk about Venezuela in 2002, unsuccessful attempt. We could also talk about Honduras in 2009.
Can we actually?
I think so. So it's like, so I think that there is a pattern that emerges here. And I understand you don't want to see it, but like this is a really clear pattern.
The pattern is one that I'm sort of very familiar with from my experiences with Nate Reeder. My dad was a Foreign Service officer and worked in the State Department for many years.
Okay. I'm sorry. I can't watch Curtis rambling about his dad again.
Why do so many? What I feel like so many of these people have parents that like work in the State Department. I don't know. Deep state.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is.
I'm kidding.
I guess part of his origin story, although I've never, like, honestly, I think even the first time I got so bored I sort of zoned out. But like, I think that the story
he turned against the State Department because he saw a bunch of it.
Well, I think that it was the fact that his dad had this deep state job and was this big lib, and I know he's claimed that his like grandparents were communists, although whether, you know, how literally he might be using that term is an interesting question, given Curtis Yarvin's relationship to the left, that he's sort of doggedly unwilling to make a distinction between anything from Utney Reader to Jacobin. But yeah, this is, so my point in this debate, right, was in large part, one, democracy is good, right? So I disagree with Curtis Yarvin about that. The takes are only going to get hotter from here, folks. But also that, I think Yarvin's story that he was trying to tell in the foreign policy part of the debate is, the U.S. has been dominated by these starry-eyed liberal internationalists who want to spread democracy everywhere, and that's the problem, right? That it's a unrealistic view of the world. And my point was, no, the United States has actually been doing quite a bit of spreading not democracy to other countries in the decades since World War II. And, God, before, if you want to talk, especially in the case of Haiti, that the, U.S. had multiple interventions there, well before that. And in general, with what the United States could, especially, right, not purely, right, God knows, the United States national security state has been involved in coups in other parts of the world, but especially in what the U.S. is traditionally considered to be its sphere of influence in the Western Hemisphere. It's been very quick to apply these kinds of tactics to left-wing governments, in that sphere of influence. And it seems to me that, look, obviously my political horizons don't end at the Nordic model. I think capitalism itself is a problem. I'm sure we'll get into that with Will. But, certainly if we're talking about short-term political goals, it does in fact seem pretty clear to me that, the sort of package of social democratic reforms we think of as the Nordic model, lead to much better and happier societies than what we've got in the United States, which is much closer to a pure form of free market capitalism, never mind what the United States has imposed on countries like Chile or Haiti. And what I really want to note there, it might not be super obvious in the way that that clip starts, but what Yarvin is really insinuating is, oh, come on. Do you think that they'd have these good results in Haiti if they just changed the economic institutions to?
Because he kind of brought up Haiti, right? That was his I thought that was because he said he pivoted to Haiti and was saying that was his idea to kind of pin you, to show how absurd you were being, right? Because clearly, in his view, the people of Haiti could never manage to have social democracy because of their inherent inferiority as a culture, if not a race, right? That's kind of where he was trying to go with it, I would say, also having watched some of these interminable clips from Yarvin.
Totally. Yeah. That this is, again, he was the one who brought it up, which I find remarkable. But the spirit in which he's bringing it up is exactly what you said. That's like, oh, the problem with Haiti isn't the politics and the economics and the, 200 years of nonstop imperial meddling. It's they're just like that. Right. So I know he said at one point, in the debate, well, everybody, if you read authors from like the 18th, early 19th century, everybody just took it for granted back then that there were such things as innate national characters. And oh, you're muted. Actually, you don't look muted, but I still can't hear you for some reason. Now I hear you.
Okay. All right. No, just wow. That's just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things that people took for granted in the 1500s, and now we've just lost that knowledge. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, seriously, like that's, I mean, it just used to be that, everybody like just took it for granted that medical problems are caused by imbalances of the humors. And, and now like, and, it's sort of, I guess it's fashionable in our modern woke society to deny that. It used to be that, that everybody knew that, that, women were too hysterical for self-government. It used to be, that we understood that flies and maggots were spontaneously generated by piles of trash.
That's something we used to think. I forgot that I forgot that we thought that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that actually is something people used to think.
Yeah,
but,
I believe it.
That's now
I was also
you know,
thinking like we don't talk about Thomas Jefferson's essays on Big Black Booty, which he has written essays about.
probably not using that phrase, but sure.
No, I can't remember the phrase he used, but I'm just going to call it Big Black Booty.
Yeah.
Lost the time. Very sad.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It seems to me there's all kinds of stupid shit that people used to believe that's called progress. And all else being equal, if something used to be a widespread belief and no longer is, I think if anything that should count as slight evidence. Defeasible, but slight evidence in favor of it probably being bullshit. But in any case, yeah. How and why do you think this change happened? If you had to guess, yeah. Okay. So I don't know. We've got like 4 more clips. I think we're gonna watch like one of them, maybe.
I'm going to gamble. I think this might be the best one. Let's see.
And so certainly the idea, whatever your preferred explanation is of what happened there, the idea that this is just like an inevitable consequence of getting a little too socialist and this is going to happen to your economy is really hard to square with the global comparative stats.
What's your best example of third world socialism?
So when you say third world,
I mean, not Norway.
Not Norway. They have so why is it, tell me your story about why you think that what's effective in Europe can't be effective outside of Europe, because I've been really unclear about this whole time.
Wow, that's a really interesting question. Let's take Japan and Haiti as our examples, because they're both island nations, and they both one of them is very economically successful and the other one isn't. So if we could say, well, the infrastructure in Japan is much better than the infrastructure in Haiti. So what would be your expectation if leaving the governments of both countries the same, we transport all the Haitians to Japan and all the Japanese people to Haiti?
So is there going to be an answer to the question I just asked that's like come in through Socratic dialogue, or are we going to get to it?
Yes. Give me your answer first.
What's my answer for?
What's your answer for
why there's better infrastructure in Japan
my
than
answer
Haiti?
is the same answer given by Joseph Dermaistre, 200 years ago, when someone talked to him about the human race and human rights, and his answer is that he had never met a human. He had met Russians and Frenchmen and Englishmen, but as far as these humans, he had no evidence of them whatsoever.
So it's just about the innate difference between Japanese people and Haitian people.
Innate difference or cultural difference, Curtis?
Innate difference or cultural difference? Well, design an experiment to separate the two, and then I'll tell you.
Okay.
That
last part is particularly amazing, right? That Thad, the moderator, like,
do you want to not be racist?
presses him. It's like, well, you just said something that sounded astonishingly racist, but maybe that's not what you meant. Care to clarify? And he's like, I'd rather leave it unclear.
I love everybody loves a mysterious, sex, something always sexy and intriguing about a mysteriously, possibly racist, but maybe only a little bit racist.
Yeah,
I'll leave that up to you, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, it's like, is it bad DNA or is it just culture?
Also, I mean, I think it's completely racist to even bring it up, but also, like, if you transfer the group of people, that's not the test you would have to do, even in his crazy racist world, because all those people have the memories of what has happened to them thus far in their lives. Like, it's not like it's just a totally inane, stupid.
It's like a Maoist, weird kind of pseudo Maoist thought experiment.
Yeah, I mean, it would have to obviously be like
with like racism baked into it.
Yeah, it would obviously have to be much more of like, what if you had the same group of people who haven't had the same, historical, like you said, interventions over hundreds and hundreds of years. So anyway, I probably shouldn't play into this ridiculous logic, but I think that's what he's going for.
Yeah. Again, yes. If somebody has grown up in miserable, grinding poverty in a chaotic environment, etc., and now they're an adult, well, okay, yes. They are going to be a product of all of those experiences, right? So it's like the idea that, like, so sure,
So you're telling me that if I took someone off the street, actually, isn't this the plot of Trading Places?
Yeah.
Actually, Eddie Murphy is it? Wait, who's in that movie again? Is it?
Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy.
Although also
pretty good, right, Eddie Murphy? But yeah,
if you took a whole bunch of gang members from Port-au-Prince and took them to Oslo and gave them like a stipend while they adjusted to local conditions, a jobs program, and etc. Quite a few of them would no longer be involved in crime, right? Like, that seems pretty clear. And you can certainly see in the U.S. context, for example, that there is a pretty remarkable correlation, right? Of course, obviously, there are some crimes, including some violent crimes, that are committed by people of various social classes. No question about that. But if you think about the kinds of crimes that really drive up, violent crime rate, look, it's nobody, where I grew up in East Lansing, Michigan, it's pretty diverse, had, it's like Michigan State is a giant university. It's a college town, etc. Right? Like, lots of people of all races. I think I knew like 2 kids named Mohammed, K through 12, etc. None of the black people in East Lansing, were joining gangs, right? Like, this is any more than any of the white people were, right? This is like, there is it's like, is this a weird coincidence that this is something that happens when people grow up in poverty, and it's not, when they don't. Right. Like, and again, as, I feel like it's been a couple of years since we used this line, right? But it's been a very overused observation on this show, but I'm just going to take it out to, for one last run. If you believe that the reason there's so much less violence in contemporary Norway is innate, right? That it's just the Norwegian, innate national character is so much more peaceful. You might want to look into Nordic history. You'll be surprised, right? I think in the past we've always suggested the film The Northman, for a vivid illustration of this point, you know.
Did not have the pants that they used to have, which included. Never mind. I'm not even going to go into it. Just look up Norwegian pants from that era, and I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, come on. Yeah, exactly. Curtis Yarvin blogs about scientific racism, but his dad was State Department official. See, so it's not just genetic. Like clearly, it's not just that Norwegians are innately less violent than Haitian people. If you actually want to know something about the explanation of these two things, so the day after my debate with Yarvin in Chicago, we did the GTAA TIR Left Reckoning live show in Los Angeles, which is actually before I moved there. So I'd earlier that day I'd flown to LAX from Chicago, and then the afternoon before the debate. So a few days before, Compact had asked if I wanted to write an article about these calls that were going around for the U.S. to do, as Curtis said, the nth intervention in Haiti. And I actually wrote that article while I was sitting in my brother's backyard the afternoon before the live show. It's called Hands Off Haiti. And because, of course, that debate that you just watched a mercifully few minutes of was foremost in my mind when I was writing this, it kind of doubled, as a response, right, to Yarvin's narrative in that debate, right? So in particular, in the article I wrote, it's hard. So at the time, there were people saying, "Oh, Haiti itself was asking for U.S. intervention." I said, one problem with this is that, quote, Haiti's own plea, unquote, for intervention was made not by Haiti, but by an unelected government that's seen by many Haitians as little more than a tool of U.S. foreign policy. It's hard to be certain how many Haitians share this view because President Ariel Henry isn't willing to hold an election. He came to power with enthusiastic support of American diplomats following the murder last year of President Moise by assassins who seem to have a lot of connections to a Miami-based security company. I know putting it that way makes me sound like a conspiracy theorist, and I don't like that any more than you do. The fact is there's a lot we don't know about the assassination that allowed U.S.-backed Henry to seize power. One of the problems here is that Henry himself has refused to cooperate with the investigation. These more recent developments are of a piece with a history of mistreatment of Haiti by major powers that goes back to the day when Saint-Domingue was a French colony. The majority of slaves bought there from Africa died shortly after their arrival, either of yellow fever or the brutal conditions of the work. This was baked into the colony's business model. Crops grown there were profitable enough to allow replacements to be constantly imported. A long and bloody revolution finally brought about independence and the abolition of slavery in 1804. Although the United States didn't recognize the new government over fears that endorsing a slave revolution in Haiti would give American slaves ideas. The hostility of the great powers to the new Republic of Freed Slaves had consequences that reverberate to this day. To wit, Haiti's slaves had to quite literally pay for their freedom. An indemnity deal struck between the country and France in 1825 required the Haitians to pay massive reparations to their former owners for all the property lost in the revolution. Even when the United States invaded and occupied Haiti in 1915, the debt wasn't canceled. Instead, a new deal was struck 7 years into that occupation, transferring the remains of the debt to National City Bank of New York, now Citibank. It took up a major share of Haiti's GDP every year until the debt was finally paid off in 1947. Just a pause on that, right? That debt from the Haitian Revolution at the beginning of the 19th century was only paid off in 1947. Anyone who tries to tell a story about the origins of Haiti's crushing poverty, crime, and inequality that doesn't feature this long history is peddling fairy tales. 10 years after the debt was finally paid off, Haiti was saddled with the dictatorship of Papa Doc Duvalier and then his son Baby Doc. American officials sometimes expressed discomfort with the absurdly corrupt, authoritarian, and violent Duvalier regime, but they nevertheless propped it up with arms and various forms of material support for standard Cold War anti-communist history reasons. After Baby Doc was overthrown by a popular uprising in 1986, the first democratically elected president was Jean-Bertrand Aristide. I quote the thing there again about raising the Haitian people from misery to poverty. He was overthrown in a 1991 coup. It's a matter of public record that some of the coup plotters have been on the CIA payroll for several years beforehand, though the agency itself may or may not have had direct or prior knowledge of what was coming. United States actually restored Aristide a few years later, but in 2004, he was overthrown again. Again, I talk about the Marines removing him from power in 2004 under George W. Bush. His political party, Lavalas, was repeatedly excluded from subsequent elections. Is 2004 ancient history? How about 2017, the year the last group of foreign troops left the island? How about the assassination of Moise and his replacement by Henri in 2021? Can we go all the way back to President Barack Obama's first term when the U.S. State Department, acting at the behest of companies that subcontract to Haitian sweatshops, lobbied the Haitian government against raising the country's minimum wage to the princely sum of about $5 a day? That was revealed by WikiLeaks' exposure of State Department cables in 2011. As far as I can tell, nobody's bothered to deny it. I could go on. I do in the article. You can check that out if you want. But I'd made that same point about the WikiLeaks cable and the attempt to raise the minimum wage in Haiti as an example of the way in which imperial meddling has reinforced the terrible economic conditions in Haiti in my debate with Yarvin. And for the last 2 years, I will periodically have Yarvin fans showing up in my social media replies to be like, oh yeah, this is the idiot who thought that, you know, all Haiti needs is a higher minimum wage and then they'll be fine. Because to Yarvin and his fans, some of whom I should say are much more racist than Yarvin himself. I remember one of them, it was actually one of these Twitter interactions where one of them referred to me as a New York Khazar Marxist. But deep cut. That's not your garden variety, you know, basic bitch anti-Semitism. That's like some anti-Semitism where you really have to know your stuff. But
it's like bougie boutique anti-Semitism.
Exactly. But for the last 2 years, I've been seeing in these social media interactions that Yarvin and his fans think it is hilarious that I think that Haiti's problems are downstream of economics and imperialism rather than Haitians just innately being like that. So I've got to say, as surreal as the last week has been, it hasn't been surprising to me to see that this kind of, again, virulent and weirdly specific anti-Haitian racism on the right is widespread enough that you have Trump, J.D. Vance. God, we got to move on and get Will on in a second, but let's just real quick do the Tucker Carlson clip.
What Trump said about people eating pets. And there were two levels on which to enjoy this. Well, the first one, I literally enjoyed it. People were like, I can't believe Donald Trump accused people of eating pets. I was like, I love him. It's just hilarious. Who would ever say that? They're eating all the pets. So great. Thank you, Donald Trump. That was awesome. Because first of all, it makes all the right people mad. Like anyone getting red in the face over pet eating. That's not true. That's never happened. No one's ever eaten a pet. Okay. You just outed yourself. You're a liar. So that's the first thing. The second thing is now we're talking about eating pets. And so now that we are, let me just count myself as opposed. Note that if PETA doesn't endorse Trump in the next 24 hours, they're totally fraudulent. I'm serious. People have run for president in this country since the 1780s. Has any presidential candidate ever taken an unequivocal stand against pet eating? None. PETA's been waiting its entire life for this, and they still won't endorse.
Yeah, I'm glad Tucker Carlson is enjoying this. This kind of hysterical fear-mongering about a group of people who in many cases came to this country as refugees from a situation that the United States itself did quite a lot to create, and who are in the overwhelming majority of cases just trying to keep their heads down and live their lives. I don't know. These people are pieces of shit. I don't know that I have anything else to say about this. Anything else from you guys? All right. Well, let's move on to a slightly less disgusting and funnier right winger than Trump, than Tucker Carlson, to certainly funnier, to set up the conversation with Will. We have Andy found this when we were talking about it, the production made in yesterday. We have Tucker. We have got Tucker on the brain. We have Jordan Peterson being interviewed by Ben Shapiro, all of our favorite people, and conceding something interesting about economic inequality.
I talked to Russell Brand about this, and I'm bringing him up for a reason. He's a lefty by temperament and by heart, and his first objection, but he's very thoughtful and quick. His first objection, I pointed out all this data showing that by every possible objective measure, everything is way better than it was certainly 100 years ago, but certainly even 20 years ago, even on the environmental front in the main. And he said, well, what about disparity of distribution? So there's the problem of absolute level of wealth, let's say, that's improving, but there is still tremendous disparity. And of course, that is fair enough. You could even point out that the role of the left is to provide a conscientious voice for that's constantly attending to the fact of continuing disparity, regardless of absolute level of wealth. And fair enough. But having said all that, it's a great mystery that incremental optimism is not sufficiently motivating. And you can't just wish human nature is going to change. It's not going to change. We got to tell a better story. And I also think that's why I'm a target, I think, is because I am actually trying to tell a better story and I'm actually having some success with it.
All right.
My DoorDash order arrived.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting concession from Jordan Peterson. He doesn't understand why, people aren't excited enough about, sort of general improvements in life over the course of the last 100 years, just because a lot of people live at the knife's edge of economic precarity, while some people, like eat gold leaf on pizza as a sign of ostentatious wealth. Or in a few cases, like Jeff Bezos, literally buy their own private spaceships. And why that contrast would bother people, even if there's some sense in which the absolute floor has increased over time, because your grandparents couldn't imagine having a flat screen TV and a cell phone. So this brings us to returning guest Will Cooper, who wrote this article for Newsweek that we are going to be talking about. And I think let's show the graphic of that one more time. So is there too much inequality in America? And Jake and Andy, I will see you guys in the post game. And now, Will, welcome back to the show. Oh, Will, you're muted.
Thanks, Ben. Great to be here.
Yeah. So actually, before I guess before we do anything else, so you want to just give me a general sense of what the thesis is of this article and why you wrote it?
Yeah. So my perspective on inequality and capitalism is it's a little different than Mr. Peterson's, and I think we'll find out in some ways different from yours, which I think will be fun to explore. But my view is the sort of the core of capitalism, where there are private property rights and free enterprise, is a good thing, and that it's a motivator. But that's only the sort of initial step, and it can get taken way too far. And the United States is a very good example of that, where in the same country, indeed on the same street, you have people worth $100 billion and families not knowing, where their next meal's coming from. And that's just pathologically insane for those two things to coexist. And there's also, in addition to inequality, there's also other really big problems that our sort of unfettered version of capitalism allows, like environmental degradation. You talked really nicely in the previous segment about exploiting workers in other countries. There's a really long list of regulations that I would support. I think you and I would be in agreement on that should be imposed, that would be very forceful, serious regulation. But at its core, you do the entrepreneurial innovation of capitalism subject to the right regulation is actually a good thing.
Gotcha. Well, obviously that's the nub of the disagreement that we do have, but I want to just give people some sense of some of the information that you cite in the article. So we have here the gaps in income between upper income and middle and lower income households rising over time. You can see the dark green line for upper income. Upper income incomes going up between 1970 and 2018, while middle income goes down and lower income more or less flatlines, maybe slightly down. We have here the incomes of the top 5% of earners since 1981. We've got household incomes since the Great Recession, but we've got we have the wealth of U.S. families since the Great Recession. This one is labeled the richest families are the only group to have gained wealth since the Great Recession. And then we've got the ratio of income at the 90th percentile to income at the 10th percentile from 1980, when it's 9.1, 1990, 10.1, 2000, 10.6, 2010, 11.7, 2018, 12.6. And we've got this showing that this is the highest gap among the G7 countries: the U.S., U.K., Italy, Japan, Canada, Germany, France. So that's the stuff. Those are pulled straight from your article. When earlier today, when I was, I posted that I was going to have this conversation. Our friend Steve Paxton also had these really interesting graphs. These are for both the U.S. and the U.K. This first one is so the green line is the U.S. and the the green line is the UK, the purple is the U.S. But they're roughly similar. So it's how people think that wealth is distributed. It's how they think it should be distributed, with a much narrower gap than how they think it is, and how wealth actually is objectively distributed with a much wider gap than what they think it is, right? So I think this is, this really brings us to the core of the point of agreement, which is that the kind of wealth inequality that exists in the U.S. Right now is really obscene. And then I guess I've been thinking about how to kind of get us to the part that we disagree on. And I think one way of doing that would be just kind of exploring, like, okay, look, if what we've got right now is really bad, then part of how we figure out what would count as okay, right, is to think about why it's so bad, right? So I mean, what's your, like, how would you answer that question? Like, philosophically, what's the, what would, like, why do you think this degree of income inequality is so problematic?
I think it's a lack of regulation. It's a lack of progressive taxation and confiscating excessive wealth. It's a lack of passing legislation that limits what companies can do, degrading the environment, exploiting foreign workers, et cetera, et cetera. I think that is really, in a foundational sense, one of the core purposes of government, in my view, is to take human ingenuity and prevent the excesses from occurring. And what we've done in this country is we've set up a system that allows the excesses to just run wild, where the regulation that's supposed to step in, and it's it's the third rail. You're not supposed to say the word, but I'm a huge believer in just redistribution. That's not happening. So I think it's actually, to me, a fairly easy answer of why we're here. Just a failure of government to do its job.
Right. So that's the story to say about how we got to this point. But I'm also curious about, when we're thinking about where we'd like to be, as opposed to where we are right now, then part of what will help us figure out, where we want to be is to figure out, it's like, okay, not just why it happened, right? Which is the story you just told me, right? But, but essentially why that's bad, right? Like in other words, you think, like, you would agree with me and disagree with, like, libertarians and conservatives that redistribution can be justified. So clearly, if you think at least some redistribution can be justified, there's something that's really bad about having inequality on this level. But I think figuring out, like, what the respects is in which it's bad, right, can help us figure out what would count as an acceptable alternative.
Yeah, that's a great question. To me, it's just harm. Human beings are being harmed. People in Haiti are forced into slave labor. People throughout the country don't have shelter. The environment is being plundered. Harm is being done. And at the most basic John Locke level of government, stepping in to prevent harm is what government's supposed to do. And they're not doing it. And so to me, that's sort of the essence.
Oh, so that's kind of a utilitarian reason for objecting to inequality. But I do want to try to drill down a little bit deeper on that, because if we think about, like, what the sort of nature of the harms is, then that can help us see, like, okay, well, what would be an alternative that we'd be satisfied with? Because, for example, right, like, to maybe try to be clearer about what I'm asking here, like, one way of objecting to the kind of distribution of wealth we have right now is just that the floor is too low, right? So I'd say, okay, the problem, the sort of sufficientarian kind of critique of really existing wealth inequality, that you'd say, okay, the problem isn't really the size of the gap. The problem is just that that the people at the bottom don't have enough, and that like, that's really what we should be focused on. And then, like, kind of what the gap is once we fix that is sort of like, well, it could be whatever, whatever it is fine, right? As long as the floor is whatever we've determined is sufficient, right? That'd be one view. But then another view is that, okay, sure, obviously, if the floor is set at a place that causes a lot of suffering, that's really bad. But the size of the gap between the floor and the ceiling could also be important in and of itself, right? Like in other words, even if you hypothetically, right, obviously this wouldn't describe the society we actually live in, but even if you hypothetically had a floor that wouldn't really, correspond to what we think we'd, like, really think of right now as poverty, that it would be a problem if, some people were at that floor and then other people were, like, at some level that was like 500 times that. And, I could certainly get into why I would see that as a problem, but just in terms of exploring where you're coming from, I'd be curious whether and why you would see that as a problem. Does that make sense? Do you see what I'm asking?
It does. Yes.
Yeah.
I think too big of a gap is a problem in itself.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's something sort of searing about the notion of a group of people being just above okay, and another group of people, taking spaceships on date night, which is like happening. And Bezos doesn't just doesn't just have a spaceship. He has an entire company minting spaceships just with his little side cash a few percent of his wealth. So I think when a gap's too extreme, that in itself crosses a moral boundary. But I also think, a place where I like to return to with this. Oh, did you want to say something?
No, go on.
A place I like to return to this, I think, is very relevant to the gap between ceiling and floor, is keeping an eye on the motivation of the people on the ground in the economy. I think it is, again, a good thing to have lots of people waking up excited to, start a successful company or be a leader in their organization and get rewarded for that. And so I don't mind some inequality if it helps motivate people, and human nature being what it is. I think there are, not everybody, but I think there are a lot of people who are motivated by that, and that society benefits. Now, it also, if you're inventing a new way to do fracking, society might suffer, but on the whole, the innovations tend to be good. But once it crosses a certain threshold, which is way below the threshold it is now of wealth, those incentives essentially disappear. Jeff Bezos would have been just as motivated to do everything he did with Amazon if he made 1 billion instead of 300 billion. And it's that excess where the motivating factor completely disappears, and you're just hoarding enormous amounts of capital when people are, far below you. That's another real important focus for me.
Gotcha. So there's a point in the article where you say, and importantly, there's nothing necessarily wrong with some people getting rich. A relatively large amount of inequality should even be encouraged. Hard work and ingenuity should be rewarded, as wealth first needs to be created before it can be redistributed. And business success stories motivate others to innovate and take risks that improve society at large. Innovation would plummet if entrepreneurs had severe caps on their income. And I think that this is really going to get us into the area of actual disagreement, right? So,
Great.
And I think one way of getting to that is to maybe try to disentangle the two things that I think, correct me if I'm wrong, are going on with your claim, right? One of them, you say there's nothing necessarily wrong with some people getting rich. And in the next sentence, you use the phrase a relatively large amount of inequality. So it seems like your view is that if you have, again, relatively large, so presumably, somewhere well under the kinds of gaps that exist in the United States in 2024. But, I don't know, if you go back to, the 1950s, maybe the average CEO was only making like 10 or 20 times or something the income of the average worker, not hundreds of times the income of the average worker. And so I assume that when you say a relatively large amount of inequality, you're talking about something more like that level of inequality as opposed to what we have right now. Please correct me if I'm misunderstanding.
Certainly a lot closer to that than what we have now.
Right.
The key line, and it
sure
requires context, is again, where does the motivation sort of fall apart? And you don't even have to make 10 times, I think, to get there. But yes,
sure. So this is the thing that I find interesting, because there are two questions here. So you say there's nothing necessarily wrong with a relatively large amount of inequality, and then you go to the reasons why that could actually be socially beneficial. But just as a kind of starting point here, it does seem to me that those two claims can be disentangled. In other words, it could very well be that there is something that's innately wrong with relatively large amounts of inequality, but it has this kind of utilitarian benefit that's so good that it's worth it, right? Like in other words, it could be that it's a necessary evil. And if that's the view, then
That's the view.
Okay, that's the view. All right.
That is a good way of articulating it. To me, if something nets out better, even if there are elements within it you prefer different, then it nets out better. And sort of from a John Rawls veil of ignorance perspective, put the veil up and set society up the way you want. I think to optimize things, the absolute best way for everybody, by driving innovation. And look at us right now. We're on a computer. There's the internet, where it's a lot of fun. This didn't just grow out of the air. You would want to set society up before you lifted the veil of ignorance to have some of that inequality. But if it wasn't for the motivating factor, all human beings are equal. Everyone's equal, and I wouldn't want any inequality, if that dynamic wasn't there.
Okay, so two initial thoughts about that. The first is about the example about the internet and computers and all of that. And I would point out, right, that quite a bit of that comes from innovation that actually happened in the public sector, right? I mean, the internet, originally comes out of ARPANET, at the Defense Department. If you ever watch Mariana Mazzucato, I think I got her name correct. She wrote a book called The Entrepreneurial State, and this is like the only TED Talk I'd ever recommend. But she does this thing at TED Talks where she'll like take out a smartphone and be like, "Look, this thing, everything that makes this thing smart, right, as opposed to an old dumb phone, is that the internet itself, the global positioning technology, the touch screen, right? All of these things, basically emerged from like public sector research labs, right? So that's just like an empirical point, that it's that the idea that, we sort of need the private sector for technological innovation, I think at the very least strikes me as often like really overstated, given how much basic research actually is housed in the public sector. It sort of has to be housed in the public sector, because if you're doing basic research, you almost definitionally don't know whether it's going to pay off. So it's like really hard to justify in terms of like quarterly projections, spending a lot of resources on it.
I totally agree with everything you said, and the overstatements are absurd. The friend you were debating in the last segment would probably say something like that, where the government, it's all private sector and government just taints everything, and that's ridiculous. Enormous developments and innovations have come from the government. To me, people are people. If a really smart, brilliant person shows up and innovates, if his paycheck comes from the government or from a company, it's the same person and he's innovating. What I think is abundantly clear empirically is the private sector has played a huge role. The government has also played a huge role. And if you were to have one and not the other, it would be worse off.
Right. Okay. So I do want to return to that because I actually do think, right, like, and I want this to be really clear, because I don't, I'm much more interested in actually like getting clarity on the issue than sort of doing, YouTube point scoring, right? And like, and I actually do think that what you're essentially giving me with that last comment, that look, we would just be worse off if you didn't have, capitalist ownership relations and the private sector as part of the deal. I think there are, even though I ultimately disagree, I think there are actually some pretty serious reasons to think that, and those need to be contended with, right? But I just want to go, because I don't want it to get lost. Earlier you referenced John Rawls and the veil of ignorance. That Rawls says, okay, you want to know what counts as a just society. You essentially imagine yourself having to design it with all the information that you could possibly want about every subject except for who you're going to be, right? And he thinks that tells you what counts as justice. But I have to say, even there, I am a little bit sympathetic to the critique of that comes from one of my favorite philosophers, Gia Cohen, who says this is not exactly how he puts it, but I think this is roughly the idea, right? Well, look, if you even imagine yourself in that veil of ignorance situation, your first thought, right, would be, well, okay, I want as equal a distribution as possible, right? And or maybe like or well, yeah, give me just a second to to do this, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
or maybe like what Cohen says is that you should have that basically you wouldn't want unchosen inequalities, right? That maybe you wouldn't object to different people just making different decisions and ending up with with different results. But if there's an inequality in distribution that's just totally outside of the control, right, of the people who get the short end of the stick, then if you thought you might be one of those people, right, you'd object to that. Now, granted, your second thought might be, oh, wait a second, maybe we'll have these bad economic effects if we don't let in some inequality, and so maybe inequality is okay if it ends up benefiting the people who are the worst off. That's Rawls's view, but Cohen's view is this this conflates two different issues, right? Sort of one, what counts as justice, and the other one is, okay, once we need to sort of make pragmatic calculations and trade off justice against other values, including just sort of pragmatic efficiency, right? Then we might accept at a certain point in history, at least for a while we work on figuring out a way to eliminate even this, right? A certain amount of inequality. But at the very least, it's good to keep an eye on what's being traded away, right? As you make that trade, right? That you're losing something significant if you're still allowing in unchosen inequalities, right? That's the Cohen point. And if you go along with that, and maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't, maybe you'd have to think about it. That's all fine, right? But if you would go along with that, right, then I think that the question is, okay, if you go back to, again, some point in the past where inequality, economic inequality wasn't as bad, or maybe you look abroad and say, I think one of your graphs we just looked at was the G7 nations, and say, hey, here are other countries in the world that they still basically have capitalism, but they don't have the degree of inequality that we do, right? So it seems like we can go, to a situation that's much more equal than we have without losing too much of that, those gains in economic efficiency. Fair enough. But then the question is, okay, well, should we be satisfied with that, right? Or should we be trying to push towards something that's even better, right? Like, so, should we be trying to push towards a form of sort of comprehensive, socialism, not in the, Soviet sense, because it'd be more democratic, but, but certainly beyond just the Nordic model, right? Something that would actually be, real socialism. Should we be trying to push towards that? At least if we can figure out a way of doing it, without sort of unacceptable losses on the other end of the ledger. And it seems to me that there are basically two reasons that you might say no, right? One of them might be you actually think sort of social democratic capitalism, right? That kind of halfway house is fine, right? That's sort of good enough. And the other one might be that you could say, well, sure, I could see that this other thing might be better, but I just don't believe it's possible to have that without having unacceptable consequences. And I am curious, I guess, maybe you've already said this, but I mean, just to be clear, which one of those, or if there's like a third option that I'm not seeing, it would be your reason for saying social democratic capitalism is fine, it's good enough.
Well, I would be comfortable going quite far in the direction of redistribution I hesitate to use socialism without us
Sure.
defining it, but I feel like that
Sure.
might take the full episode. So
well,
I would
let me see if I could do like a, let me see if I can do a really quick version and then get your thoughts, right? So if socialism, right? So if capitalism is, and you kind of said this earlier, you're talking about, the private sector, entrepreneurship, all that stuff, right? So if capitalism is a system where, let's just use the old fashioned terminology, the means of production, right? The economic goods generating machinery of society, factories, farms, stores, Amazon distribution centers, right? All that stuff. That stuff is in the hands of private owners who aren't necessarily the people who are actually working there, but this class of capitalists, of private business owners, right? If that's what capitalism is, and if what socialism is it at minimum is social ownership of the means of production, that in some way or another, we don't have that class anymore. We have some form of collective ownership instead, whatever that looks like, right? If we kind of take that as a baseline definition, right? So my view would be that capitalism itself, even in the sort of better form of it, right? That looks more like Norway and less like the United States, is still, unacceptably inegalitarian in different ways we could get into. And that and so all else being equal, we'd be much better off, right? Moving towards, again, democratic, et cetera, but, form of socialism, then, is like, from everything you've been saying, like I was a little less clear on the Newsweek article, but from everything you've been saying in this conversation, it sounds like your reason for saying no would just be that you think that the effects on like economic efficiency would be too bad.
Correct. Yeah, I think if you go too far, I think we have enormous amount of room towards socialism as you define it, and I would support enormous amount of redistribution. I mean, I would take $200 billion from Elon Musk right now. I'd leave the poor chap with only like $1 billion. He'd be so. I mean, it'd be less, but enormous amount of redistribution, enormous amount of regulation. Right? It's not just the tax code, but it's laws that are enforced that prevent, profit-seeking activities from the private sector. But I wouldn't go all the way to giving the government control over the means of production. I think what you would have there is a reduction in a truly negative, harmful thing, standing alone, inequality. All human beings are equal, in my view. That's my premise. But I think what you would see there would be a reduction in productivity and innovation, strength. I think being strong as a country in the modern age is important too. You would just see a reduction in that realm that would be harmful and would harm the country, as a whole. And so if you go too far to that extreme, it becomes a net negative. So that's my basic view. And the last thing I'll add is I do think the private sector plays a really important role. I think government plays an important role and has been a big part of the history of lots of our important innovations. But the private sector, I think, does do an enormous amount of R&D. It's a really well-known business model to throw lots of things at the wall and see what sticks. And when it sticks, then you run with it. And big companies that do harm also have huge R&D budgets in the billions of dollars, and they're innovating. So it's not, I don't think, I might have misheard you, and I want to give you a chance to correct it if I did. But I don't think it's a government function to do really core, innovative R&D. I'm starting to see driverless cars more and more here in Northern California, and I know that Google has been working on its driverless car subsidiary for like 15 years, and it's just now finally coming. And those often don't even work, right? Amazon created a phone that went extinct within a year, and I think spent billions on that. So my to sum up, I think if you go too far, the net impact, you get rid of one problem of the inequality, but you create a host of new problems, and the net impact is negative.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I think as far as innovation goes, again, I think really quite a bit of basic research, right? So like fundamental breakthroughs that are then adapted. It's true, right? Like in the current system by private sector companies to like specific products. Does happen in the public sector. Again, all these things that make this a smartphone. This seems like a really powerful example, or like
Well, I think
if you think about
lots of private sector innovation in the smartphone, right? Or are you saying that's not?
Well,
that Apple didn't innovate, or what are you saying?
I think that Apple innovated. It's certainly considerably less than people tend to assume. I mean, if you think about the sort of most basic innovations that are built into it, right? The internet, the touch screen, global positioning system, right? None of these things, right, came out of the private sector. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a role that Apple's playing, was playing in, sort of taking those basic breakthroughs and translating it, into the sort of smartphone as we know it, right? Like they certainly did, but I think that is a really I think that how much of technological progress under capitalism does rely on the public sector is pretty significant when it comes to thinking about what a alternative might look like and what would or wouldn't actually realistically get lost in the change, right? So I think that if you think about why capitalist ownership structures themselves might be a problem beyond the sort of failures of government to do enough redistribution of the results, or to regulate the bad practices enough, this sort of more fundamental problem, right? That think like, okay, and I know this can feel a little silly because we're so ludicrously far from achieving even this much in the United States that it can feel a little bit like I don't know, playing a game of pickup basketball and start saying exactly what I want to do when I make it to the NBA, right? But but if we did achieve that sort of Sweden level of redistribution and welfare state and regulatory state in the United States, you think about capitalism even as exists in Sweden. Well, with capitalist ownership structures in place, it seems to me that you have a few basic issues. One of them is about the issue that you've been focusing on, which is wealth distribution. That if the people who are actually owning the means of production are this, smaller subset of society, which they're going to be regardless. I mean, any kind of modern and industrial economy involves lots and lots of people working together, right? So if you have mostly private ownership structures, then you're going to get even if you have pretty robust trust busting or whatever, right? It's still going to be the vast majority of people are not going to be capitalists. They're going to be workers. So if you have this class of capitalists who are running the means of production, and then they're basically making the decision about how to distribute the result. And, that can be counteracted to a certain extent by labor unions and, regulation, right? But they are basically deciding how to divvy up the proceeds. And that, it seems to me, is a recipe for pretty much automatically getting a degree of distributive inequality that's going to be much worse than, I think what can really be justified in terms of that idea that any sort of unchosen inequality, right? Any kind of inequality that the person at the bottom end of couldn't do anything about is going to be a problem, right? So that's one issue about distributive equality. Another issue is about inequality of power. And in fact, I would argue that in some ways that's the more basic issue that inequality and distribution is downstream of. That certainly in the workplace, if you have capitalist ownership relations, that means that the majority of the working age population is going to be spending half of their waking hours. If you have an 8-hour day and you sleep for 8 hours, right? That's half of your waking hours in a environment where you're being ordered around by people who have no democratic accountability to you, who you might have some sway over with the threat of quitting, especially if you're like have rare skills. But even that is not that big a deal for most people, because it's just much easier for employers to replace employees under the overwhelming majority of circumstances than for employees to replace your jobs. So you have this kind of petty despotism that the people who are making decisions about the place where you spend half your waking life are unelected, and often they're out of like sheer good luck. Whether it's the sort of most obvious forms, like you inherited the business from your dad, or I think less obvious but still very real forms of luck. And I think that's also going to extend to the political realm. Let's say you took away the however much you said you were going to take away from Elon Musk, the 200 billion from Elon Musk. It would still be the case, right, that the level of inequality and economic power between Musk and, say, workers at Tesla, even if he only had a couple of $2 billion or whatever, right, whatever he's left with at the end of this, right, that the fact that he controls all of those jobs, the fact that he has so much more, even in this hypothetical, he has so much more disposable money than any of those workers, means that look, if you're a line worker at Tesla and you try to call your senator, you're going to be very lucky if you get to speak to an intern, or like if you get to speak to somebody with an actual staff job and not just an intern. Whereas I'm pretty sure if you're Elon Musk and you'll call your senator, you get to personally talk to your senator, because
the senator might not get to talk to Musk.
yeah, exactly. Right. So it seems like that degree of inequality and economic power is going to inevitably generate unacceptable differences in political power, right? So all of these seem like really good reasons to sort of object on a basic level to capitalist ownership relations. And I want to give your side of this your due, right? Because this is, I think, the sort of core point you keep coming back to. Say, okay, like you could even accept all of that, saying, okay, yes, all else being equal, everything you've just said is a problem, but we need to have a flourishing economy, and so maybe it's just worth it in the ultimate exchange. And I would just say, well, let's not be too quick. I mean, like, if we could, we know that there are some things that the state can run just fine outside of the market entirely. A lot of these I think we would agree on, right? Healthcare, for example, right? And so how about this, right? We can have, a form of socialism where things like healthcare and education, I would add, energy, transportation infrastructure, finance, right? So what socialists sometimes have called the commanding heights of the economy are under direct public control. And let's say that the sort of concerns that you're raising, this is obviously an empirical issue, it requires testing. I think there hasn't been nearly enough experimentation along these lines, but let's say, for the sake of argument, that the sort of problems about about innovation, even, which we were arguing about earlier, about incentives, about sort of coordinating production with fine-grained consumer preferences, all of those sorts of problems that people usually bring up in defense of capitalism. Let's say that means that we need some kind of private or quasi-private sector. It's like, okay, can we at least have that be a sector of worker-owned companies, because if you have worker-owned cooperatives like, Mondragon in Spain is a particularly large and famous example of this, and the Basque Country of Spain has like 80,000 worker members. If you have that, then you're just not, like you solved the inequality of power at work problem. You've solved a lot of the resulting political inequality problem. And certainly in terms of distributive inequality, look, even a worker cooperative might not have a 100% flat pay scale. You might, people might vote to give some people, more income to entice them to take certain jobs, either because they're very demanding and they involve a lot of stress and responsibility, or because they're particularly dirty and dangerous jobs on the other end. But so you might not have a totally flat distributive scale, but come on, you're not going to have one guy who's going to live like Elon Musk and a bunch of other people who are going to live like Tesla workers.
Yeah, you touched on a lot of really big things, and I think you did a really good job articulating them. I agreed with a lot of what you said. I think from an empirical standpoint, I think, and this is a good thing, I think to note, I think our only real empirical disagreement so far, at least, I actually think the private sector has played a really significant role in the innovations. The government has too, but I think Apple did an enormous amount, I think, laying the pipes all around the world to create the internet, done by corporations. Empirically, I think we have a different sense of that relationship, and that probably drives some of our overall disagreement. As far as what you outlined, I think you sort of made this really good laundry list of problems with capitalism. I was just nodding, imbalances of political power, and all hierarchies at work that are really unfair and can be very dehumanizing, and some of the worst abuses in the country are just a boss and their subordinate, right? There's protections, and there's a lot of robust protections, but they only go so far, and that can be a really unhappy place. And another thing I'd say is some of the most unhappy parts of hundreds of millions of people's lives is just work, going to work and having a boss and being in a hierarchy and not getting fulfillment out of that. So there's this huge critiques of capitalism that I think are correct. I just think, kind of the Churchill democracy quote, all forms of capitalism are terrible, except the alternative's worse. And I think if you were to move really strongly towards creating a system where there was much more government ownership and control, it wouldn't be, the cartoons you get from conservatives and libertarians wouldn't happen. But I do think you'd run into lots of problems. I mean, Elon Musk might not get the senator phone call, but different people would absorb power in different ways. And I don't think it would be, and I'm not suggesting you were saying it, but I think it would have its own sort of host of new problems. And the economy part of it, to me, is really, it's important. It's not, let's have a flourishing economy and therefore I'll accept anything. I think the alternatives would not only harm the economy, but they'd have their own set of problems and their own set of challenges that we'd have to agree with. And so again, where does it net out? Wherever you are on the continuum here, in my view, lots of problems, lots of great things too, right? But I don't think if you just veer strongly towards socialism, you run away from a lot of big problems.
Yeah, look, if my if my task here was to convince you that there's a possible form of organizing society that leads to zero problems, I think
yes,
that would be silly, right? But
yes.
But I think that without sort of suggesting that socialism will be a perfect utopia where nothing bad ever happens, and the oceans are made of lemonade and all that, right? Like it still
Yeah.
it still seems to me right? That the sort of basic imbalances of power, the what that does to democracy, what that does to how good a life people can have and give to their children if you have even 10 times as much wealth unchosen at the bottom and top, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, are all powerful enough problems with what we have right now that without having the illusion that the alternative is perfection, I think we should still keep trying to find an alternative, right? Because I do think this is really bad.
We both want an alternative. My alternative retains the core of the free market and free enterprise, but has a lot added on top to prevent these harms. And the alternative you want just eliminates that. So the question for you is,
sure.
what describe
sure.
like a really good socialist country that, and let's use a big one, the size of
Sure.
the United States and all the problems that come with our size and challenges.
Well, if we have that,
what does that look like?
Okay, what does that look like? Okay, sorry. I'm actually glad you finished that sentence because I was slightly misunderstanding what you were saying. What does that look like, right? So yeah, I think that what it could possibly look like. I'd point out to Bhaskar Sankaras, the editor of Jacobin, has a book from like 2019 called The Socialist Manifesto, where if you read just the first chapter of that book, right? I think he kind of lays out in a fairly vivid way what this could look like. But I think what it looks like is you take the things that we already have, pretty good reason to think can be run just fine, totally outside of the market. Again, healthcare, education, energy, the commanding heights. I think a lot of these experiments have already been run. And you take those outside of the market. I think if the primary mechanism for starting new firms was grants from publicly owned banks as a matter of policy, even if you did need some sort of private or quasi-private sector, again, I think you could at least have those made up of worker-owned firms to get that kind of workplace democracy component. I don't think that these elements have been combined in this way in the world yet. But one, I'd point out that even what you want at the scale of the United States hasn't quite happened yet. That this is something, in fact, that right-wingers will very frequently point out, that it's like, oh yeah, you can point to
tiny
Norway,
little Denmark, yeah.
These are like tiny little homogenous countries, and you think this will work in the United States. And so, I think that your calculation correctly on that is okay, but there's no particular reason to think that the scale is means that that what can work with X number of millions of people can't work with X times 10 or 20 or 30 millions of people. And at the very least, we should try. And I would make similar points. And I would also point out that if it's true that we don't have we haven't had these elements in that combination yet, like some of the individual components of the elements we actually have beta tested in the real world. That again we have worker cooperatives that are as efficiently run as we'd want, like Mondragon. We have entirely state planned healthcare systems, for example, have worked very well, et cetera, right? So a good number of the specific elements have already been successfully beta tested. I think that combining them in this way and trying to go as far as I want to go, you're right, it hasn't been at this point in history. But I would just make, and I know we're running right up against time here, so I'm just going to say this and then kind of give you a chance to respond to it. And also feel free to plug your book while you're responding. But because I don't want to let you go without giving you a chance to do that, right? But but the sort of general methodological point that I want to make about this is, you're right. At this point in history, we haven't had that yet. But look, there was a time when you could say the same thing about political democracy, that, you know, that's like, oh yeah, you can point to some city states or whatever, right? But, you know, you don't have like political democracy implemented at any meaningful scale yet, right? There's a point where you could say that about the abolition of slavery, that it's like, oh, slavery has existed for every society that we know of for all the thousands of years that we know about. You know, we've never had a complex society without it, right? That was true for quite a bit of human history, right? That, you know, you could say the same thing about extending equality to women, you know, that's like, oh, every society ever, you know, has had these sort of different rights and responsibilities, the genders, etc. And so in general, it seems like a bad idea to say we haven't achieved some bit of progress yet at this point in history, therefore we never will. Right. So that's where I'd want to kind of leave off on that. But I want to, you know, we're at the hour. So I want to give you the last word and the substance of this, and then I want to let you plug your pluggables and call it a day.
Thank you. So well put, Ben. Thank you. And I agree. The argument that it's never been done before, therefore it can't be done or shouldn't be done, or undercuts the idea that we should be trying it, is a terrible argument, and certainly not one I'm making. I was looking for your views on what it would look like, but not arguing that because it hasn't been done, it can't be. And I thought you made a really good point about the size of the United States cutting against any, we've never been this size, right, without the structure we have, and that's a terrible argument. I think a lot of agreement, and I think the fundamental view is private sector, public sector difference. I think a lot's flowing from that. I think the cooperative idea is probably better in theory than in practice, but I would just put that in the exact same category of public, private, and what the private sector can do and can't do. But all in all, I really appreciate your views. Very well thought out. And if the United States moved dramatically towards your view, we would both feel a lot better. If it went past mine, I'd want to pull it back a little bit, but we'd both be cheering if there was lots of movement. And I want to emphasize that in conclusion. As far as pluggables, I'll shamelessly plug my book, How America Works and Why It Doesn't. I do talk about these issues in the book, and it's a lot of the problems that we've talked about and that we've agreed about, are assessed in that book as part of why I don't think the country's working the way it's supposed to. So thank you. Appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you. There is a link to that book in the description for this episode. So thank you, Will. Let's do this again.
Awesome. Would be great. Thanks, Ben.
All right. Thanks. All right. That was Will Cooper. And we are now going to go to the post game for patrons. We have Mean Djene Bajalan joining us. We are going to watch some Walter Block versus Dave Smith on Israel Palestine. We are going to man, I'm just doing some real-time self-censorship, but I'm not doing it fast enough. So come up with something less sexist than catfight. And whatever's been going on with Laura Loomer and Marjorie Taylor Greene, we are going to be
it's a real dog fight. They're fighting.
There we go.
They're fighting like dogs.
Perfect. So yeah, they've been at it like just a couple of dogs.
That actually is not. Dogs do fight, so that was much better than Trump's comparison. But
yeah, there's actually that. Yeah,
dogs might fight more than cats. Honestly,
dogs actually almost certainly fight more than cats. I don't see how that could not be
and
true.
Also, I think part of the cat fight thing is the connotation that it's kind of just like a shitty, not real fight. But if you've seen like two dogs that are kind of just like, pampered dogs from home, like kind of have it out, I think that you're kind of recapturing like two Upper East Side, like golden poodles or whatever, like barking at each other. That's kind of what. Oh
no! I like it. Don't mess with it anymore. That's perfect as is. So that we're going to be looking at that. So all of that is going to start in like 2 minutes. If you are a patron, you should already have a link. If you are not, I'm not mad. I just want you to make better choices. No, if you are not, do consider it. We have a lot of fun in the post games. You get the Discord server. You get good discussions there. You sometimes get early access to things. Most importantly, I mean, these are all just kind of ways of saying thank you. You get our very sincere gratitude for helping to keep this thing going. Since we are, after all, continually not living in the world that I want, or even the world Will wants, where we're living in the late capitalist hellscape of the United States in the 2020s. And so, that income does have to come from somewhere. So yeah, this allows us to all spend as much time as we do on the show. So please do consider giving that support if you're in a position to do so. That's patreon.com/Ben Burgis. Yeah, if you are, I will see you there in just a moment. Left is best.